Reading 59 from the Psychological Commentaries on the teaching of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky by Dr. Maurice Nicoll, Volume 3, Great Amwell House, December 28, 1946. Feeling of I. On one occasion, Mr. Ouspensky was asked, "What is the right feeling of oneself?" He answered that this question belonged to what he had spoken of earlier, namely, the wrong feeling of I. He said in so many words, "In this work, one must separate oneself from pictures, from eyes that like to suffer, from internally considering eyes that enjoy negative emotions, that justify their past, and so on. A person may have a stereotyped wrong feeling of I, and through this, everything is wrong in him or her. Only by observing that he or she has wrong feeling of I, and separating from it, can they expect to begin to have right feeling of I. For example, how many people simply hold themselves too tightly, too rigidly, and do not observe it? On another occasion, he was speaking on the same question and said that wrong feeling of I is always due to buffers, which give a one-sided feeling of I. For a man to feel himself rightly, he said, he must have real conscience, which is to feel altogether, and no one can have real conscience if he is full of buffers. Such a man or woman sees only one side, only is one side of themselves. Real conscience is the same for all people and has nothing to do with different moral or religious systems. It is a general and permanent phenomenon given to us, but now buried in everyone, that is, in sleeping humanity. The esoteric problem is how to awaken it. Man has fallen asleep, and because of this world state of sleep, he lives lost. He has lost touch with all that is of the most importance to him, all that could help and guide him aright. As a consequence, all sorts of religious theories and methods of education and social experiments have replaced what alone could truly show him what he has to do and how he should live and what he is. If a man begins to know what he is, he begins to have right feeling of himself. Only real I can ultimately give a man right feeling of himself in the full sense. But real I and real conscience are not far distant from each other. A man asleep can only have an artificial feeling of I, according to what he esteems himself on. It will be a false feeling of I, and one that he may suffer from all his life without realizing it. He has buffers in place of conscience. Real conscience is only possible in the absence of buffers. Let us take today this phrase used by Mr. Ouspensky. If a man begins to know what he is, he begins to have the right feeling of himself. This work is about self-knowledge. You all know that over the temple at Delphi, where esoteric teaching existed in the days of ancient Greece, was written above the portal, "Know thyself." Now, no man, no woman can know themselves unless they begin with direct, impersonal, uncritical self-observation. Why should this change the usual feeling of I, the usual feeling of oneself? Because by this uncritical, impersonal, almost remote observation of oneself, one begins to see that one is quite different from what one has hitherto taken oneself as. One's usual feeling of oneself, feeling of I, does not fit what one is. Understand that you may have had all your life a totally wrong feeling of I, and this wrong feeling has stopped all further growth in yourself and probably spoilt your life. You have become fastened to an error a mistake, something not real in yourself. As long as life is the neutralizing force, you will be unable to tear away this totally wrong, not real feeling of yourself, with which you meet your daily existence and other people. Only through self-observation, done through the strength of the third force of the work, will this fixed, life-produced feeling of yourself begin to change. And what a relief it is to find that you have been trying to lead your life with an utterly wrong set of eyes, with the wrong, generally dominant feeling of I. It is a marvelous thing to find you can move in new directions internally and escape from this spurious invention of yourself. Just say to yourself, why am I always like this? Why do I always feel this? Why, in short, am I always the same fixed person, with the same points of view, the same attitudes, the same little unpleasantnesses, the same judgments, the same dreariness, the same criticisms, the same thoughts, the same reactions? Now you know this is called the realization of one's mechanicalness, and this again is called the first stage of self-remembering. Why? Because it means that a person who begins to see internally his or her mechanicalness has already separated something from what they have taken themselves complacently as. Something different from themselves has appeared in their inner world. This is the beginning of development. That development which begins with observing I and leads to deputy steward, and then to steward, and at last to real I. Is it not extraordinary to reflect that we are not real I, but false I, and that what we are and take ourselves as is all invention? Is it not tragic that all these wrong feelings of I, these wrong feelings of what oneself is, these inventions of ourselves, lead our lives? Now there can be no change of being without an alteration in the ordinary feeling of I. The 3 lines of work speak of this. Work on oneself, work in connection with others, and making new relations with them, and work for the sake of the work itself. To remain the same, to have the same outer manifestations, to feel the same feeling of I, means simply that one is not following any of the 3 lines of work. Sometimes an overwhelming sense of the work may alter a person. Sometimes a realized self-observation may alter a person. But if you have still the same feeling of I, you have not yet changed being.